There's a moment when you realize someone has been playing you. The conversation that felt so natural, the advice that seemed so genuine, the relationship that appeared so mutual. Suddenly, you see the strings. You've been dancing to someone else's music, and they've been conducting the entire symphony. Most people, when they discover this manipulation, they panic. They get angry. They feel violated, betrayed, stupid. But Machiavelli would smile. Because what others see as victimization, he saw as education. What they experience as defeat, he recognized as intelligence gathering. The manipulator just revealed their entire playbook, their psychological patterns, their strategic weaknesses. And now you have something far more valuable than revenge. You have insight. This isn't about becoming cruel. This isn't about turning into the monster that hurt you. This is about understanding a game that's been played against you your entire life. A game where the rules were never explained, where you were told to be kind while others were taught to be calculating, where your empathy became their weapon and your trust became their advantage. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to create more manipulators. He wrote it to expose them, to show how power really works when the masks come off. And buried in those pages is something most people miss: the blueprint for making yourself immune to manipulation, not through cynicism, but through clarity. See, there's a fundamental difference between being manipulated and being Machiavellian. The manipulated person reacts. The Machiavellian observes. The manipulated person explains themselves. The Machiavellian lets others reveal themselves. The manipulated person seeks to be understood. The Machiavellian seeks to understand. But here's what's really fascinating. Modern research has confirmed what Machiavelli intuited centuries ago. Those who score high on psychological assessments of Machiavellianism literally have different brain structures. Their prefrontal cortex processes social information differently. They lack the automatic empathy responses that make most people vulnerable to emotional manipulation. What seems like a deficit is actually a strategic advantage. They see the chessboard while others are playing checkers. They recognize patterns while others get lost in emotions. They maintain psychological distance while others get pulled into drama. And most importantly, they never forget that every social interaction is a negotiation where information is currency and emotional reactions are liabilities. Now, before you think this means becoming cold or heartless, understand this crucial distinction. Machiavelli never advocated for the elimination of human connection or genuine relationships. What he advocated for was the elimination of naive vulnerability, the end of emotional exploitation, the death of the assumption that others operate with the same moral framework you do. Think about the last time someone manipulated you. Really think about it. What did they do first? They gathered information. They asked questions that seemed caring, but were actually intelligence collection. They created artificial intimacy. They made you feel special, understood, uniquely valued. They offered something you needed: validation, opportunity, security, belonging. And then, once they had your psychological profile, once they understood your fears and desires, they began the subtle process of influence. The conversation shifted. Suddenly, you were explaining yourself more, justifying decisions you'd never questioned before, finding yourself saying yes to things that felt wrong, but seemed logical given their framing. You started doubting your instincts, second-guessing your boundaries, making exceptions to your values. And through it all, they remained calm, reasonable, slightly distant, always holding something back, always keeping you reaching for their approval. This is the manipulation pattern that Machiavelli decoded 500 years ago. The creation of emotional dependency through calculated intermittent reinforcement. The strategic use of uncertainty to generate psychological tension. The masterful employment of your own values against your own interests. But here's where it gets interesting. The same psychological principles that make manipulation possible also make it predictable. Once you understand the game, once you recognize the patterns, the manipulator becomes visible. Their techniques stop working. Their power evaporates. Because manipulation only succeeds in darkness, in the confusion of not knowing what's happening to you. When you can see the strings, you stop dancing. Machiavelli understood something that most people still struggle with today. The world contains two types of people: those who see social interaction as mutual benefit, cooperation, shared growth, and those who see it as a zero-sum game where your gain is their loss, where your weakness is their opportunity, where your trust is their weapon. The tragedy isn't that these people exist. The tragedy is that the first type, the cooperative, trusting, empathetic type, refuses to acknowledge that the second type is real. They keep projecting their own moral framework onto others. They keep assuming good intentions. They keep giving second chances to people who saw the first chance as reconnaissance. This isn't cynicism. This is pattern recognition. This is strategic thinking. This is understanding that your kindness, your empathy, your willingness to see the best in others, these are strengths, but only when applied to people who operate with similar values. When applied to manipulators, these same qualities become vulnerabilities they will exploit without hesitation or remorse. The research confirms this. High Machiavellians don't manipulate everyone equally. They target specific personality types. They look for people who are agreeable, trusting, empathetic, people who will interpret manipulation as misunderstanding, who will make excuses for behavior that should trigger alarm bells, who will sacrifice their own interests to maintain harmony. They don't waste time on people who are psychologically defended. They don't target individuals who maintain emotional distance in new relationships. They avoid those who ask direct questions, who document conversations, who verify information independently. They move past people who seem comfortable with conflict, who don't explain themselves, who don't seek approval. In other words, they avoid people who think like Machiavelli. So what does it mean to think like Machiavelli when dealing with manipulators? It means shifting from reactive to strategic. It means moving from emotional to analytical. It means transitioning from hoping people will change to accepting who they've shown themselves to be. It means recognizing that when someone shows you their character through their actions, you don't need to wait for additional evidence. You don't need to give them opportunities to prove your suspicions wrong. You don't need to exhaust every possible explanation before protecting yourself. It means understanding that your emotional reactions are information, not instructions. When someone makes you feel confused, defensive, guilty, or inadequate, especially if this feeling comes from someone who barely knows you, that's data. When someone's presence in your life correlates with increased drama, decreased self-confidence, or compromised boundaries, that's not coincidence. That's causation. It means developing what researchers call strategic empathy. You can understand why someone behaves the way they do without accepting that behavior. You can recognize their psychological patterns without becoming responsible for managing their emotions. You can acknowledge their humanity without granting them access to yours. Most importantly, it means learning to operate with what Machiavelli called necessary distance. Not coldness, not cruelty, but the psychological space required to see clearly, to think rationally, to respond rather than react, to choose your battles and position yourself advantageously before those battles begin. Because here's the final insight that changes everything. Manipulators aren't more intelligent than you. They aren't inherently more skilled at reading people. They aren't naturally gifted strategists. They simply operate without the emotional constraints that make most people predictable. They lie without guilt. They betray without remorse. They exploit without hesitation, and they assume everyone else has the same capacity, which is why they're often shocked when their techniques stop working against someone who's learned to think strategically. When you understand their psychology, when you recognize their patterns, when you respond to their tactics with Machiavellian clarity rather than emotional confusion, something fascinating happens. The power dynamic shifts, the game changes, and suddenly, you're no longer the one being played. They realize they're dealing with someone who can't be moved by guilt, swayed by false urgency, or confused by emotional manipulation. Someone who doesn't explain themselves when questioned, doesn't defend their boundaries when tested, doesn't chase when withdrawn from. Someone who watches their techniques with quiet amusement rather than falling victim to them. This is when the manipulator faces a choice. They can escalate, becoming more aggressive, more desperate, more obvious in their attempts to regain control. Or they can retreat, moving on to easier targets who still react predictably to their psychological games. Either way, you win, because escalation exposes them to everyone watching, and retreat removes them from your life. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It requires rewiring decades of social conditioning that taught you to be accommodating, to give the benefit of the doubt, to maintain harmony at the expense of your own interests. It means training yourself to sit comfortably in tension without rushing to resolve it, to remain silent when others expect explanations, to ask questions instead of providing answers. The first step is mastering your own emotional temperature. Manipulators are expert thermostats. They know exactly how to heat up your emotions, through criticism, through withdrawal, through artificial deadlines, through manufactured crises. And they know how to cool them down, through apologies that don't change behavior, through promises that create false hope, through just enough validation to keep you engaged. Your power lies in maintaining your own temperature, regardless of their attempts to adjust it. When they create urgency, you slow down. When they demand immediate responses, you take time to think. When they escalate emotionally, you become more measured. When they withdraw to punish you, you use the space to evaluate the relationship objectively. This isn't about becoming robotic or unfeeling. It's about refusing to let others dictate your emotional state. It's about recognizing that your feelings are valid information about what's happening, but they're not commands that require immediate action. You can feel angry without acting in anger. You can feel hurt without seeking immediate comfort from the person who hurt you. You can feel confused without accepting someone else's explanation as truth. The second transformation is information warfare. Manipulators succeed because they know more about you than you know about them. They ask probing questions disguised as caring conversation. They remember details about your insecurities, your ambitions, your pressure points. They catalog your responses to different stimuli. They build psychological profiles while you're just trying to connect. Turn this around. Start observing them with the same strategic attention they've been observing you. Notice what they do when they don't get their way. Watch how they treat people who can't benefit them. Pay attention to the stories they tell about their past relationships, their former employers, their family dynamics. Listen to how they speak about people who've disappointed them or challenged them. Most importantly, notice the gap between their words and their actions. Manipulators are often gifted speakers. They know how to say what you want to hear, but their behavior tells the real story. They promise respect while violating boundaries. They claim to value honesty while deceiving you. They speak of mutual benefit while extracting maximum value for minimum investment. Document these inconsistencies, not to build a case against them, but to build clarity for yourself. Because manipulators are masters at making you doubt your own perceptions. They'll rewrite history, deny conversations that happened, claim you misunderstood their clear communications. having a record, even if it's just notes to yourself, anchors you to reality when they try to create alternative versions of events. The third shift is strategic communication. Stop explaining yourself. Stop justifying your decisions. Stop providing reasoning for your boundaries. Every explanation you give is intelligence they can use against you. Every justification opens a door for negotiation. Every reason you provide becomes a target for their counterarguments. When a manipulator asks why you made a certain choice, you don't owe them your thought process. When they question your judgment, you don't need to prove your reasoning was sound. When they challenge your boundaries, you don't have to defend their validity. Your decisions are yours to make. Your boundaries are yours to set. Your reasoning is yours to keep private. Instead of explaining, redirect. When they ask why you did something, ask them why they need to know. When they criticize your choices, ask them what outcome they're hoping to achieve with their feedback. When they demand justification for your boundaries, ask them why they're having difficulty respecting them. This redirection serves multiple purposes. It stops you from providing ammunition they can use against you later. It puts them in the position of having to explain themselves. And it reveals their true intentions. Are they asking because they genuinely want to understand, or because they're looking for ways to change your mind? The fourth evolution is selective availability. Manipulators thrive on your accessibility. They need to be able to reach you when they want something, to occupy your mental space with their problems, to insert themselves into your emotional world whenever it serves their purposes. Your constant availability becomes their strategic advantage. Start controlling your accessibility like a valuable resource. Don't respond to messages immediately just because you saw them. Don't accept phone calls every time they ring. Don't drop your plans when they create artificial emergencies. Don't make yourself endlessly available for their emotional processing. This isn't about playing games or being deliberately difficult. It's about establishing that your time and attention have value. That access to your mental and emotional resources requires consideration for your needs and circumstances. It's about training people to respect your schedule, your priorities, your right to be unavailable when it doesn't work for you. Manipulators will test this boundary aggressively. They'll create urgency where none exists. They'll claim your delayed response caused problems. They'll make you feel guilty for not being instantly available. They'll accuse you of changing, of being distant, of not caring anymore. These reactions tell you everything you need to know about why they wanted unlimited access in the first place. The fifth transformation is outcome independence. This is perhaps the most difficult but most powerful shift you can make. It means becoming genuinely indifferent to whether specific people stay in your life or leave. It means being willing to lose relationships that require you to compromise your values, ignore your instincts, or sacrifice your well-being. Manipulators count on your fear of loss. They know you don't want to lose the relationship, the opportunity, the connection. They leverage this fear to extract compliance. They know you'll tolerate behavior you shouldn't tolerate, accept treatment you shouldn't accept, make compromises you shouldn't make, all to avoid the pain of letting go. Outcome independence eliminates this leverage. When you're genuinely okay with someone leaving your life if they can't treat you with basic respect, their threats lose power. When you're prepared to walk away from opportunities that come with unacceptable conditions, their artificial scarcity becomes irrelevant. When you'd rather be alone than in relationships that diminish you, their emotional manipulation stops working. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to all relationships. It means being selective about which relationships you're willing to fight for and which ones you're willing to release. It means recognizing that some people are meant to be temporary in your life, and that's not a failure. It's wisdom. But here's what's truly powerful about thinking like Machiavelli. You don't just become immune to manipulation. You become someone manipulators avoid entirely. Because they can sense when someone won't be easily controlled. They can feel when their usual techniques won't work. They can recognize when they're dealing with someone who understands the game they're playing. They move on to easier targets, and in doing so, they leave you in peace to build relationships with people who operate with genuine intentions, who respect boundaries without testing them, who add value to your life instead of extracting it. The irony is beautiful. By learning to think strategically, by refusing to be manipulated, by maintaining psychological independence, you create space for authentic connection with people who don't need to manipulate to get their needs met. You attract individuals who appreciate your strength rather than seeking to exploit your vulnerabilities. This is the ultimate victory over manipulation. Not defeating the manipulator, but making yourself someone they can't touch. Not out-manipulating them, but evolving beyond the need to play their games. Not seeking revenge, but achieving something far more valuable. Complete psychological freedom. You become someone who moves through the world with unshakable inner authority. Someone who doesn't need external validation to know their worth. Someone who can't be guilt-tripped, gaslit, or emotionally blackmailed because they've developed what Machiavelli would recognize as the rarest form of power. The power that comes from needing nothing from anyone. And this is where the transformation becomes permanent. Because once you've tasted this freedom, once you've experienced what it feels like to interact with people from a position of genuine choice, rather than emotional dependency, you can never go back to being the person who could be so easily moved, so predictably controlled, so effortlessly exploited. The manipulators in your life will sense this shift immediately. They'll feel the change in your energy, the difference in how you respond to their techniques. Where once they found compliance, they now find calm indifference. Where once they generated anxiety, they now encounter steady resolve. Where once they created confusion, they now face crystalline clarity. Some will escalate desperately, pulling out techniques that worked before, increasing pressure, manufacturing crises, threatening consequences. But these desperate measures only reveal how much power they've lost. Their escalation becomes evidence of their diminished influence, proof that you've successfully reclaimed your psychological sovereignty. Others will simply disappear, moving on to targets who still react predictably to emotional manipulation, who still explain themselves when challenged, who still sacrifice their peace to maintain relationships that were never mutual to begin with. Either outcome serves you, because you've learned the most valuable lesson Machiavelli ever taught, that the strongest position isn't the one where you defeat your enemies, but the one where your enemies defeat themselves trying to reach you. This is how Machiavelli outsmarts manipulators, not through counter-manipulation, not through becoming what you despise, but through evolving beyond their reach, through understanding their psychology so completely that their techniques become transparent, through developing such psychological independence that their approval becomes irrelevant and their disapproval becomes powerless. You don't need to announce this transformation. You don't need to explain your new boundaries. You don't need to justify your strategic thinking. You simply embody it, live it, breathe it. And those who encounter you will feel the difference immediately. The unshakable presence of someone who has learned to play a different game entirely. The game where you always win because you've stopped playing by rules that were designed to make you lose.